right, gents and germs, welcome back to Monte Poker episode 27. Or is this 28? This might be 28. Anyway, you guys are in for a treat today. We have an action-packed episode ready to go. As you saw in the intro, it is once again at Outlaws. We're playing 1-3. For the newer players, this game is a match the stack game. A lot of you have been commenting on how the pots are very big for a 1-3 game, and you're absolutely right. Depending on the night and how much money is on the table, game might sometimes play closer to a 2-5, if not bigger. Anyhow, that's enough of that. Let's get to the action. All right, everybody, we started this session pretty carded, but eventually looked down at ace king of clubs under the gun +1. We started this session at 4 o'clock and it is now 5:30. We haven't seen too much action thus far in the session, so when we get the suited premium, I am ready to go. I opened at $10 and immediately get raised to 20. The player calls to 20 and then the small blind ends up going all in for 45. Immediately after that, the big blind reshoves for a significant amount more. He has a little bit over 200. I have a little bit over 200. I have an awesome hand. I'm sure he has an awesome hand. So we're just going to go ahead and play for all of it right now. The player behind me ended up tanking for a few minutes, but eventually put in the call as well. So just like that, we are playing for an absolutely massive pot. Eric is straight up not having a good time right now, trying to figure out what to do. He's priced in with a very wide range, but probably also feels like he's behind with this many all-ins. He ends up mucking ace jack offsuit face up, which is not good for me. We lose an out, but we haven't lost hope yet. 830 in the middle, 4 players going to this flop, and it comes 5-6 deuce rainbow. This is about the worst flop we could get for our hand. We need to get 2 more clubs to make a flush or go runner 3-4 for a straight, and by some miracle we end up drilling the 4 of clubs on the turn, which means any 3 would give us a straight and any club would give us the flush. We now have a ton more equity in this hand and actually have a chance at winning. Unfortunately, our dreams are ruined when the jack of diamonds comes on the river and all we have at showdown is ace high. The big blind shows us pocket kings. The player behind us shows us king queen suited. The player at the end of the table never ended up revealing his hand, and we have to watch this $830 pot get scooped in the wrong direction. I add on for a couple $100 to our stack and we go pretty carded again for 2 hours before eventually looking down at pocket aces. We raised to $15 and we get a couple callers, so we go off to this flop multi-way. 48 in the middle and the board runs out 4 king 9 with 2 hearts. Now at this point I'm regretting not raising more pre-flop with aces because this pot is super tiny and we can't really go for a lot of value here, so I decided to bet $25 into 48. It's about a half pot size bet, putting 73 in the middle. We get called pretty quickly and then instantly raised by 100, so we no longer have to worry about how we're going to get money into this pot. And now looking back at this action, I realize that the pot graphics is actually short $30, but that's not going to change too much. Anyhow, the action gets back to me and we're definitely going to put in a raise, and this is where I think I made a mistake. I end up raising to $300 even. I think I probably should have min clicked it to 200 instead of 300 due to how much I have left behind. More on that in a minute. Anyhow, I definitely wanted to go for a raise here. Our opponent went for about a pot size 3 bet, which is setting alarms in my head telling me he either has a good hand that he's trying to charge the maximum for the flush draw, such as maybe ace king with no heart, or he's on the flush draw himself. I'm beating both of those hands, so I want to get the money in while we're ahead. My thought process here was to build up this pot on the flop. If our opponent calls and the turn is not a heart, then we can just go all in. Our buddy Eric thinks it over for 2 to 3 minutes, but eventually does elect to call. The turn comes a queen of clubs, which technically does put a straight out there, so I think it over for a little bit, trying to make sure that our opponent has the flush draw and not the straight draw. And this is where we go back to my decision from earlier where I mentioned I think I used the wrong bet sizing. The pot is a little under $700 and I have less than $500 left in my stack. It is not even a pot size bet, and even if I jam here, our opponent has pretty good odds to call to chase his flush draw. Had I only min clicked them and bet 200 on the flop instead of 300, this pot would be 475 and I'd have a little over 500 in my stack. Therefore, I would have a bit over a pot size bet instead of having $200 short of a pot size bet. Either way, I'm ahead in this situation and want to get all the money in, but it was just something I noticed when we were watching this video. So we jam as we planned, making this pot 1149. We fade the snap call, so it looks like our read was right and our opponent is on some sort of draw, and he goes into the blender once again. He doesn't seem to like this spot, but he realizes that he's priced in to call.
70. Wow.
Gambling is
broken out.
This is a call and I don't want to do it. I'm serious, this is a call and I don't want to do it. Welcome to our way.
It looks like we were right. Eric is in fact on a draw. He's getting the right odds to call here. I'm actually very okay with him just folding here. This pot's a good size as it is already, and I wouldn't mind taking it down without the sweat. Fortunately, that isn't what happens. After a few minutes, Eric does decide to put in the call. 16-25 in the middle, and the river comes an ace of hearts. Yikes, man. We end up hitting a set on the river, but it's absolutely no good. Eric was in fact on the flush draw and takes the rest of our stack in this spot. We reloaded for another 600 here, trying to make something happen. Our two premium hands did not treat us well, so now we look down at our absolute worst hand, ace jack. The run bad is real with this one, but if we can't win with our good hands, we're gonna win with our cursed hand. There's a $15 open, and 4 of us are going to this flop here. $61 in the middle, and the board comes out ace 7-9 rainbow. Pretty good flop for our hand here. Our opponent decides to continue firing for $25. I'm going to put in the call with top pair and a reasonable kicker and see what happens on the turn. The turn is a jack of diamonds. We're now ahead of ace king and ace queen, which were the only two hands we were really worried about. And to make things even better, our opponent grabs a good stack of chips and decides to fire here for $60. We very quickly put in the call and see another very safe card on the river, a 4 of hearts. Our opponent goes into the tank for quite a while here, but eventually does decide on betting 135 on this river. Pot is now 376, and I have a decision to make. Are we going to call here or raise? The opponent we are involved in the hand with is normally on the tighter side. If he had a hand like ace king and ace queen and I called his bet on the flop and the turn, I don't expect him to fire on the river here. Typically he would just check call. When he bet initially on the flop, I put him on an ace with a pretty good kicker, but due to the action, I'm now questioning whether or not he had something like an open ender on the flop with 8-10 or potentially a set of 7s or set of 9s. Obviously pocket aces and pocket jacks would have raised pre-flop, so I'm not putting him on those sets, and I also don't expect him to get to this river here with pocket 4s. I know this is super nitty, but I really felt like I was beat in this hand, so I just called, and then our opponent shows us pocket 7s. You hate to see it with top 2, but luckily we were right in the situation and lost the minimum in this hand. Not sure what would have happened if I would have raised and then he ripped it on us on the river. All right, so about an hour goes by and we look down at queen 10 of hearts. It's been a little while since we played a hand or raised going into a pot. I feel like this hand is good enough to raise with, so I bump it up to $15. We get a couple callers and go to this flop 4 ways, $60 in the middle, and the board comes out queen jack jack with 2 clubs and a spades. The action checks over to me. We have top pair, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue here for $25. With 4 people in the hand, it's very possible that somebody has a jack, but we're not gonna not bet top pair here when we are the pre-flop aggressor. We could just as easily have a jack here as well. We only pick up 2 more customers, so we go 3 ways to this turn, which comes a 6 of hearts. Doesn't change anything on this board. Still have top pair, still losing to a jack, no flush or straight draws got there, so we're gonna continue firing here for $80. We lose 1 customer, and when the action gets back over to our buddy Eric, he thinks about it for quite some time here. I don't think he would be thinking this long with a jack, and I don't think he would be just calling with the jack. So when the river comes a 5 of clubs, the only other hand that I was putting him on besides the jack was a flush draw. That flush draw now got there. So normally I would check in this spot, but considering we're playing versus an opponent that likes to play a very wide range, I did decide to fire pretty small here for 125. I know it's a bit suicidal to go for super thin value in this spot considering that the front door flush got there, but as I mentioned, this particular opponent likes to play a wide range, and I'm trying to target a bunch of his single pair holdings, such as maybe pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, or a weaker queen. I'm not sure if this was the right play or not in this spot. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Anyhow, Eric tanked for quite some time, but did eventually put in the call. I flip over our queen 10. He tells us that we're good, and he throws his hand into the muck. Not too sure about how we played that one, but I'm happy to be winning our first big hand of the session. 2 hours go by and we look down at pocket 5s on the button. There's a small pre-flop open and 5 callers, so we go 5 ways to this flop. flop that comes 4 king 6 rainbow. The pre-flop aggressor decides to continue for $20. We have one caller, and for some reason I don't believe him, so I put in the call. Player behind me calling is a bit concerning, but we'll deal with that later. And to my surprise, the fourth player also calls 156 in the middle, and the turn comes the 7 of hearts. Called our opponent really light on the flop, and now we actually turned a lot of equity. We now have an open-ended straight draw. To make things even better, our opponent decides to continue here to the tune of $90. The action now goes back to the player in between us, who takes some time to think this decision over, but I don't think he's going to put in a call. I'm putting him on a single pair hand such as a king with a reasonable kicker, but with how many consecutive little cards are on the board, it's going to be difficult for his single pair hand to hold up. Eventually he returns his cards over to the dealer, and we're not going to go anywhere with an open-ended straight draw. I decide to take some time and contemplate raising here, but I don't think our opponent is going anywhere, so I do decide to put in the call. The big blind then throws his hands in the muck, and we're off heads up to this river, which comes the 8 of spades. It's a fantastic card for us, and to make it even better, it is not a heart. Not that I was putting our opponent on the flush draw, but it's always nice to not have to sweat anything on the board. Our opponent decides to go for a third bet here on this river card. He chooses the same sizing as the turn and leads out for $90 here, making this pot for 26. I'm not sure if his $90 bet is a blocker bet trying to get to a cheap showdown, or if he's trying to just get value from some really weak hands like some sort of single pair hand or a weak 2 pair that he's ahead of. Either way, I think our hand is too strong here to not raise. We also went runner for the straight, so it's a bit of a sneaky straight to make here. I decided to bet 3/4 of the pot, $300 here. Our opponent snap calls. I flip over our straight. Our opponent doesn't flip over his hand immediately, which is typically a good sign, and eventually shows us that he had pocket 4s for a set on the flop, and we totally sucked out on him, but I'm not complaining about it. Let's go on to the next one. A little over an hour later, we get involved in another hand. I unfortunately missed the pre-flop action, so I'll get you up to speed. I straddled under the gun for $6. There was a $15 raise in early position. 4 players called behind me, so I ended up putting in the call with 6-9 of spades. A bit wide, but I felt like I was priced in to see the flop, and then the flop comes queen 5-6 with 2 spades. We flopped middle pair, and we have the flush draw to go with it. I don't think this hand is good enough to bet because it's only a 9 high flush draw, but we're definitely not going to go anywhere. I decide to check. The player behind me bets $30, and to my surprise, every single player calls, so we are absolutely priced in to call here. I am a bit concerned that somebody might be on a bigger flush draw, but luckily a 7 of hearts hits the turn, so now we have a straight draw to go along with our flush draw. We still only have a pair of 6s though, so I put in the check, and that's when we notice a player getting out of line on the other end of the table. The dealer lets him know that the action is not on him, and he quickly grabs his chips and pulls them back. A bit shady, but that's all I will say on that topic. Anyhow, after that blunder, the other 2 players do decide to check it over to the eager bettor. He bets $85 here, and then the button goes into the tank. He thinks it over for about 2 minutes, but does eventually elect to put in the call. I'm not going anywhere with our flush and straight draw, so I'd also put in the call. We lose the player to my left, but the middle position player does elect to call. 589 in the middle, and we go off to this river, which comes a 4 of clubs. Yikes. Could not have missed any more. I think about bluffing at it for a second, but this is a very dangerous spot to bluff with 4 other people in the hand, so we just check it. Gets back over to the eager bettor. He looks down at his hand, looks down at the board. Fire for $200 here. The action gets back over to the button, who ends up thinking it over for quite some time before eventually folding. When the action gets back over to me, this is a pretty easy fold with my pair of 6s, and then the player behind me also mugs pretty quickly. It sucks to brick out on a run out like this and not improve at all when you had so many outs, but considering how many people were involved and the fact that nobody called this river bet, I think it was very likely that somebody was drawing to a bigger flush, so we may have lost the minimum here. An hour and a half goes by, and I had added on for another $400 or $500 in my stack, trying to get even for the night. We're playing a PLO Bomb Pot on the dealer change. We have Jack 9 5 deuce rainbow. Board comes out 10 5 Jack. Normally I wouldn't bet a hand as weak as 2 pair in a PLO Bomb Pot, but considering that there is a straight and flush draw available on this board, I think it's worth betting because we're going to get action. And when the action gets back to my buddy Nick, he decides to cap it. For the new reviewers, the PLO Bomb Pots here are capped at $100. Everybody buys in for $10 hand pre-flop, and the maximum you can bet is $90 once the cards have run out. Once the action gets back to me, I'm gonna put in the call. My buddy Nick could be doing this with king queen. A set of 5s is unlikely since we're holding one. He might have a set of 10s, but even in that scenario, we could hit a jack for a bigger full house. Anyhow, 3 of us going to this run out, 360 in the middle, an 8 of spades peels off on the turn, and then a jack of clubs hits the river. So we do end up rivering a full house. Nick announces that it's good and shows that he had a royal flush draw along with being open-ended. The second villain also had a flush draw, but obviously missed. Nothing too crazy, but it was a substantial pot going in our direction. At this point in the night, we're stuck a couple $100. Yes, we have about 1,800 in front of us, but we're still stuck. Look down at pocket 9s and decide that this hand is worth about $15. So I do bet it and we get a few callers. We're going to this flop multi-way and the board runs out 3-3-5 with 2 clubs. Don't expect our opponents to connect with this board very often, so I make a continuation bet here of $40. It's about half the pot. Trying to get some people off of their draws here. We lose 2 players but do get 2 callers. 195 in the middle and we go to this turn 3 ways, which comes the deuce of spades. This card will typically connect better with our opponent's range than our range. I was putting the villains on a hand like 2 big clubs, such as like a king queen or king jack of clubs, or some hands like an suited ace, like an ace deuce or ace 4. If they had a hand like ace 3 or ace 5, they would also be involved, but there are a lot less combinations of ace 3 suited and ace 5 suited. In my opinion, the most obvious draw was the clubs, and I think in this spot it's a pretty clear check, but for some reason I decided to bet instead for $135. A bit of a blunder on my part. I think the early hours of the morning were starting to affect my gameplay significantly at this point. Anyhow, the button decides to go all in for less at this point, and then my boy Anthony pretty quickly puts in the call. So we're gonna go heads up to this river card here, which comes a 6 of hearts. Anthony checks it over to us, and at this point, since he checked this river, which completed a straight, I'm thinking that he might have bricked out with the flush draw and decided to bet 300, which is an even bigger blunder in my opinion than me betting the turn. If he has a missed flush draw, why am I betting 300 here? He's not gonna call with 2 clubs and no pair, so I'm not getting any value from that hand. If he has a straight, it's possible he's gonna check it over to me, assuming that I'm gonna try to bluff at it in position. And to make things even worse, we're betting into a dry side pot of about $50, so we still have to get through the button. This is a massively fishy move in my opinion. Anyway, Anthony puts in the call. I flip over my pair of 9s that are over the board. He flips over 7-4 suited. He did have the club draw on the flop, but then he turned an open ender and got the straight on the river. Mad unfortunate. I think we were probably behind the button anyway, even if Anthony hadn't made his straight. Really kicking myself about how I played this one, but we gotta recover and move on to the next one. We've been getting roasted about our early vlog gameplay, how we were playing garbage starting hands and overcalling with garbage when we were getting priced into small pots. So of course we learned to stop doing that and throwing away garbage hands pre-flop, correct? No, absolutely not. We are a glutton for pain and still making dumb choices when we played long sessions, are stuck a bunch of money and get tilted. To be honest, we've been avoiding the tilt factor pretty reasonably in our most recent sessions, but here we are once again showcasing our poor decisions for the whole internet to see. 36 in the middle with various players involved. The flop comes out 8-3-4 rainbow. I decide to take the betting lead and fire here for $12. It's about the third of the pot. I'm trying to build this pot up just in case we hit our straight so we can actually make a good amount of money. One player folds, Nick puts in the call, action gets over to the other side of the table. We pick up one more caller and Anthony decides to raise it up to $65. The button folds and the action's back on me. I was just talking about how I wanted to build this pot, and somebody else raising is a good way to build the pot, right? To make things even better, the player behind Anthony starts cutting out chips and decides to throw them in the middle, giving us even more bang on our buck for putting in this call. 243 in the middle, 3 of us involved, and the turn comes a king of diamonds. changes absolutely nothing for our hand here. So I do decide to put in a check. The opponent behind me very quickly checks it over to Anthony. Anthony doesn't take too long before deciding to bet here, and he goes for a bet sizing of $100. The action gets back over to me, calling 100 to make 450. It seems like a pretty good price, especially considering the player behind us might call one more street as well. Unfortunately, she does not, so we go heads up to this river, which comes a jack of clubs, which doesn't change anything for me on this board. But now I'm considering if Anthony may have been playing a hand that contained an 8 like this. He raised on the flop, which seemed like he was trying to protect his hand. Both opponents checked to him on the turn, so it would be pretty standard for him to go for a continuation bet in that spot. So since we just have 6 high and have literally no showdown value, I decided to go for a pretty chunky bet here of $275. I'm hoping to get a fold out of all his single pair holdings. Considering the pre-flop action was only $6 and everybody limped in, it's very possible to have a hand like 3-4, King 4 suited, King 3 suited, King 8 suited, Jack 8, Jack 3, Jack 4, etc. Or maybe even pocket 3s or pocket 4s that don't want to raise pre-flop. And after about another minute or so, Anthony does put in the call. I let him know that he's good. He flips over King 8 suited, and we throw our hand into the muck. Nice hand, buddy. Thank you for not making me show 6 high to the whole table. Moving on. The last hand of the night happens at 228. We look down at ace queen offsuit in late position, and I decide to bump it up to $50. We only have a little bit over 500 in our stack at this point. We end up getting 3 callers, and we go off to this flop with $200 in the middle. The board comes out 7 queen 4 with 2 diamonds. We have top pair, top kicker, and the action checks over to us, so I decide to bet $60 here. It's a little over a quarter of the pot, and to my surprise, the player on the button snap jams for 254 total. The other 2 players get out of the way. The action gets back to me, and I'm going absolutely nowhere with this hand. I think the most likely hand he has is a flush draw. If he has a set of 4s or a set of 10s, so be it. The turn comes a 10 of hearts. The river is an 8 of clubs. I flip over our ace queen, and the villain mucks his hand, so we never find out what he has. At this point, Nick and I decided to take off. I played one more orbit just to see if we could catch anything else before we had to leave, but unfortunately, I'm just gonna have to make peace with being stuck the most I have ever been at the poker table. But on the bright side, we did make a Denny's run immediately after that, so there's that. Anyhow, let's get into the bankroll update. Fortunately, I did not get any footage of me cashing out because I knew if I stayed there any longer, we're just gonna keep playing, so we took off. Anyhow, we started playing at 4 p.m. on June 1st. We bought in multiple times, as you guys clearly saw. We were in for a total of $2,700, and we cashed out a whopping 800, so we were down 1,900 bucks. Very, very unfortunate. So getting caught up to the following sessions and any prior sessions to this, you guys saw everything before this. We played this session on the 1st, we went to Shumash on the 2nd, ended up profiting $665. And then after that, we ran off to Vegas, but I will leave the Vegas cash bankroll update for you guys for next week. And real quick, just taking a peek at the graph, even after this monstrous loss, we got a little bit of it back at Shumash, and our current total is at $9,411 to date. Not too shabby, but it'd be much higher if we didn't take that massive loss. And I just think as soon as we hit 10K for our bankroll, I got really cocky and wild and started just gambling a bit more than I normally did. I was really focusing on like staying disciplined, and once we got to the milestone number, I just kind of went crazy. Don't know why, can't tell you. There's nothing bad going on. I think I was just so excited that I had like a big enough bankroll that I could sit there and not get bullied on the table and bluffed out of hands just with big bet sizes, that I started calling really big bet sizes, even though technically shouldn't. I also got a little trigger happy with bluffing. Not to say that we don't bluff at all anymore, but I think about it a lot more. And at that point, I wasn't really paying attention to like what people's ranges were versus what I was trying to represent, how the action went. I just thought, hey, if you put enough money in the middle, people will fold, which is obviously not really the case. Anyhow, I'm rambling at this point. Thank you everybody for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed this week's content. I know I made some pretty dumb decisions this week, so I expect to see you all in the comments. But to the newer viewers, please don't take it too seriously. I am by no means a professional. I am trying to become an overall winning player and improve week to week, but we still make a lot of mistakes. I really appreciate those of you that leave constructive criticism. It's actually helping my gameplay a lot. And with that, we're signing off. Good luck on the felt, guys. Take care.